Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. You guys, Saqib and Suhaib.
Walaikum assalam wa
Alaikum
rahmatullahi wa
salam.
barakatuh.
All right, we're live yet again, and I think our task today is to read 46 and 47 of Genesis and see what comparisons we can draw to what we've studied in the Qur'an. Any comments before we start? No?
We can get it.
Okay, I'll get right to it then. And Israel journeyed onwards with all that was his, and he came to Beersheba.
Mhm.
Okay. And he offered sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac. And God said to Israel through visions of the night, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. And he said, I am the God of your father. Fear not to go down to Egypt, for a great nation I will make you there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will surely bring you back up as well. And Joseph shall lay his hand on your eyes. And Jacob arose from Beersheba. And the
So
sun-
this is the last time in the biblical account that God communicates with the patriarchs. So now there's nothing until Moses, right? So it began with Abraham. This is the final vision, sort of recapitulating what was initially said to Abraham. You'll go to Egypt. You'll come back to the promised land.
okay.
So it's
So this is an echo of what was already said in the Bible to Abraham.
right, and it's so you see a lot of closures here. So that promise was made. It's kind of being recapitulated here. You had the initial kind of communication with Abraham. You have the final communication with the patriarchs here. Even there's Genesis itself has a nice kind of structure. It begins with creation and ends with kind of Jacob's death. So there's a nice beginning and end to the book.
I see. And the sons of Israel conveyed Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons Pharaoh had sent to convey them. And they took their cattle and their substance that they had got in the land of Canaan, and they came to Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him, his sons and the sons of his sons with him, his daughters and the daughters of his sons, and all his seed he brought with him to Egypt. And these are the names of the children. So this second passage, I'm guessing, would be lots and lots of names, yeah?
Lots and lots of names, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to skip that name stuff.
Okay.
And you tell me which verse I should go to. Should I go to 28?
You can go to, I think, 26 probably.
Okay, 26. So all the persons who came with Jacob to Egypt, issue of his loins, aside from the wives of Jacob's sons, 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2 persons. All the persons of the household of Jacob coming to Egypt were 70.
So you see that's
It might be worth just noting what's mentioned in 19 as well, which is in verse 20, which is Joseph's children. Manasseh and Ephraim were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On, because we had explored that question before about Joseph's wife and children, and that had come up in our own study of the surah a couple of times, because there's no mention in the surah of Yusuf alayhi salam getting married,
right?
Such that when you come to the ending part, when he's reunited with all his family, there's no mention that he already has children himself. But we presume that to be, or we can assume that to be accurate based on this historical account,
right,
or the biblical account. But then it would be interesting why that's not brought up. But also that the tafsirs mention that, or some of them mention or suggest that the wife of the Aziz became married to Yusuf, which does not agree with the biblical account, at least not according to mainstream interpretation. But we did see that there was this theory, wasn't there, about
Potiphar and Potiphara?
Yeah.
There was something, or maybe some slightly strange theory, that it could actually be the same person. But yeah, it just was reminding us of that point as we come to here. Maybe if there's anything more, maybe Saqib feels to say.
And I think it's important to note here that the notion that he married the wife of the minister isn't explicit in our literature either. I mean, it's an idea that's been kind of thrown out, but it's not necessarily hard and fast or unanimously accepted among our scholarship either.
No. But of course, even when it comes to this, then at the end of the story, then the Mufassirin actually mention again narrations which correspond to a very large extent with the biblical account, even to the extent of when Joseph was buried, then Musa moved his remains, and so those things are mentioned in the tafsirs, but as tafsir narrations rather than as quotes from the Bible. But when they do that, they might even say, and I've noticed this in one of the tafsirs at least, that the wife of the Aziz bore him 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh.
Wow.
So they kind of take part of what's being said there, but they sort of adapt it.
Wow.
It was the wife of the Aziz was his, because the Aziz had, I don't know if they say he died or it was were divorced, and then she married to Yusuf. So that's again is one of the sort of popular notions as well in people's understanding of this story, but not something that is stated in the Quran, but it is something that comes up in tafsir, but not in a sense of being something that we have to affirm or accept.
What about exegetical literature from the biblical scholarship side? What do they say about the subject? Do they have anything to say, or other than the name that's been given out there?
No, I've not come across anything. So I think we maybe discussed amongst ourselves, but not on the camera, the idea that Potiphar and Potipharah might be the same person. So Potiphar is the name of the minister of Pharaoh in whose house Joseph was a slave, and Potipharah is the name of the priest whose daughter Joseph marries. So if they are the same person, which is an opinion you find in rabbinic literature, then he's married to the daughter of his former master, not to his former
wife. Okay.
That's if they are the same person. And there's this funky explanation of why his name got changed, which we needn't go into.
Okay.
Unless you want to go all X-rated.
Well, you made okay. No, okay.
Just sip your tea,
That smirk on your face told me do this, but don't do. Okay, after this.
That's what we call a knowing sip.
Yeah.
The tea is hot tonight.
When the cup doesn't have some kind of gloat on it, his face does.
No comment.
And Judah had sent before him to show him the way to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen, and Joseph harnessed his chariot and went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. Goshen is in Egyptian territory. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so this is where he promised it. It's going to be quite interesting. There is an interesting contrast with the Quran, because so he's already promised his family, I'm going to settle you in Goshen. It's definitely going to happen. But now what you see is he's kind of going to have to convince the Pharaoh to sign up on this. So there's a little bit of uncertainty whether he's sort of confident, that's why he's telling him to go there, but he realizes that he's going to have to convince Pharaoh. And the Quran is much more, I think, confident. يَتَبَوَّأُ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ حَيْثُ يَشَاءُ.
Yeah, and then udkhulu Misra inshallah aminin. It's just an open statement. Yeah.
Yeah.
And appeared before him and fell on his neck, and he wept on his neck a long while.
So the pronouns are confusing here. Like you don't know who wept on it, whether Joseph.
Okay, so he fell on his father's neck.
Or the other way around. Could be the other way around.
I see. The ambiguity of the he and his. Okay.
Yeah.
And Israel said to Joseph, I may die now after seeing your face, for you are still alive. And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, let me go up and tell Pharaoh, and let me say to him, my brothers and my father's household that was in the land of Canaan have come to me, and the men are shepherds, for they have always been handlers of livestock, and their sheep and their cattle and all that is theirs they have brought. And so when Pharaoh calls for you and says, what is it you do? You should say, your servants have been handlers of livestock from our youth until now, we and our fathers as well, that you may dwell in the lands of Goshen, for every shepherd is abhorrent to Egypt.
Right. So you see, it's still.
That's what you were talking about yesterday.
Yeah. So they don't like these country bumpkins, number one, and there's still some uncertainty on Joseph's part.
I like country bumpkins. I like that. I'm going to use that.
Right.
I was going to say they don't like these pendus, but
pendus.
Yeah, that's country bumpkins.
Exactly.
You were going to say rednecks.
Rednecks, yeah. These people from the boonies.
Derogatory terms. They have obviously origins in derogatory things, but that reflects each society has got its way of talking about people of certain classes and
village people, basically, or people from rural areas.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, the village, whatever. Yeah.
It's interesting, right? In sociologies across the world, probably people in cities speak of people in villages in condescending terms.
Yeah. Well, in Scotland, they're called chuchters, which means rough.
That sounds like a bad word in Pashto. What did you say?
I don't know. But then it comes from the word meaning rough. So so then chuchters, yeah.
Huh. I'd like to see, those of you that are watching, in comments, whatever cultures you come from, are there words that are condescending used for people in villages and in rural areas by city dwellers? Is that the case in Indonesia and Malaysia? Is that the case in Bangladesh? I know that's the case in Pakistan. I know that one for sure. That's certainly here in the United States. When I lived in Texas, or when I lived in New York, everybody else was basically a hick. So they're very condescending to anybody else who lives anywhere else, right? So there is a cultural thing about people that come from rural areas, and this seems to be in line with that, in a more universal way than just the Egyptians being the superior people. So that was a fairly short chapter. I'm going to move on to 47, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers and their flocks and their cattle and all that is theirs have come from the land of Canaan, and here they are in the land of Goshen. So there's a kind of mirroring repetition of what was said before.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The Qur'an doesn't do that as much, except for in the dream sequence, right? So, like, go to the Pharaoh and say this, right? Itiya Fir'auna faqula, right?
Yeah.
Then there's not fa'ata Fir'auna wa qala, and then repeat the phrase. It's actually assumed that was already said, and let's move on, right?
I mean, it's interesting that you raised the exception of the dream, and that's something that caught the attention of Mufassirin. So they sort of asked that question: why was the dream sort of when this messenger has come, he repeats the words of the dream, and it becomes a repetition in the ayah of the 7 cows and these 7 cows. So why is that? And then they said things like, because it indicates the importance of conveying dreams exactly as they are, because if a person themselves don't understand something, they shouldn't change up the words, because that may affect the interpretation. So the point is that they noticed that because it's not typical of the Quran to just repeat details like that in subsequent verses.
Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself, but actually I was just, the Jawad Quraishi paper that you sent me on Surah Yusuf and its coherence. I was actually going through it rather carefully and preparing a presentation based on it, and I'm really impressed by his work and what he's done. It's quite thorough, actually. And what's interesting is he considers the king's dream, and he makes a pretty convincing argument. He considers the king's dream the literary center of the entire surah. And in a very interesting way, the language of the king's dream is very unique to not only the surah, but generally in the Quran also. It just kind of stands in a literary anomaly on its own. So it is peculiar in the way that it's talked about compared to everything else that's been talked about in the story, in the Quran. And especially in the way that it's echoed and the way that it's repeated. So that was a pretty interesting thing. Inshallah, when we get to the study of its coherence, I'll illustrate that more clearly. But I thought that was an interesting thing, that's the thing that sticks out. And that's probably the only parallel to the biblical account, style-wise, that I can see. That's very glaring, that something is said and then said over again exactly in the same words, and then said over again exactly in the same words. And that's not typical of the Quran like that, especially if the same quote is being passed on. Right?
Somebody in the chat has figured out that I'm reading the chat. Correct? I am reading the chat. But we don't.
The only one. I can't do it. I get distracted. So if you want to mess with Sahib,
they've been watching my eyes. They figured out that I'm reading the chat.
So they're not reading the chat. They're watching you, and you're watching the chat. This is the.
Yeah. Well, somebody said that I've got a nice accent, so that's fine. You can say things like that if you like.
Okay. So, and from the pick of his brothers, he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is it you do? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, and we and our fathers as well. And they said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn. Sojourn? Help me out. My English is not that British.
Kind of temporarily. A sojourn is a temporary stay in a place.
Okay. So we've come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, because the famine is grave in the land of Canaan. And so let your servants pray, dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, saying, why is this italicized? And Pharaoh, is that implied?
Pharaoh said to Joseph, what's the italicized? I'm looking at a different translation.
So the italicized portion is, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, saying, that portion.
Just saying, or just the entire thing?
That entire sentence.
That's weird.
Odd.
So 47. Normally,
It's like 5ab. Servants prayed, dwell in the land of Goshen, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, saying, I guess
Yes, it's a translation of what's in the Hebrew. I'm not sure why they've italicized it.
that's weird.
Translation.
Let them, I guess he wants to make a note about it later, maybe. Let them
Maybe.
dwell in the land of Goshen, and if you there are able men among them, make them masters of the livestock over what is mine. And Jacob and his sons had come to Egypt, to Joseph, and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, heard. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you, the land of Egypt is before you. In the best of the land settle your father and your brothers, let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And Joseph brought Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And
Right.
Pharaoh said to
That's
Jacob,
quite significant, right? Because in the Bible, you have the kind of the superior blesses the inferior. That's like a theme that you find. That's made explicit, I think, in Genesis as well with the story of Abimelech. So the fact that Jacob is blessing Pharaoh shows a number of things. Number one, he's not following protocol. And you even see it in his language. He doesn't talk about himself as your servant X, your servant Y, right? Whereas the brothers were following a correct protocol when they were talking to Pharaoh. Jacob's too old now to be worried about that kind of stuff. So you kind of see his kind of rough shepherd characteristics kind of coming through. So he's too old to worry about the protocol stuff. And secondly, the fact that he's saying that he's blessing Pharaoh, and he'll do it again when he leaves, is kind of a fulfillment of the earlier promise that God made to Abraham that all of the nations of the earth will be blessed through you, right? So you're seeing now how that promise is being fulfilled by the blessing spreading outside of just Abraham's descendants. And
so, okay, this might sound like a ridiculous question, but how does because we think of these as Muslims of old. How does a Muslim bless a non-believing king? Like, what does that mean for us? And what does that mean?
Well, by the way, in the translation I have, it says it could also just mean greeted.
Yeah, greeted I get, but I mean, blessed sounds like there's a prayer ceremony type thing, or I know the Christian tradition has different rituals surrounding blessing someone, but
it's I mean,
clearly. So what does that mean practically?
I guess, I mean, praying for blessing.
The closest thing to somebody making dua for someone, is that blessing someone?
That's basically the idea, to wish to pray for their well-being.
Is that a thematic recurrence in biblical literature, meaning believer blessing a non-believer?
No, I mean, so the blessings, what's happened in Genesis so far is the promise made to Abraham has, in terms of the blessing, has been passed down, right, generation to generation.
Yeah.
And kind of father blessing son.
Right.
And what the break here is now Jacob blessing someone sort of outside of the community. And like I said, I think what's happening there is this fulfillment of a promise that was made to Abraham that through your descendants, kind of all of the nations will be blessed. And you're kind of seeing that take place here, because through Joseph now, all of the Egyptians are going to be saved. And
the reason I'm getting kind of stuck here with this, and maybe there's no answer to this that we can decipher, but it seems in the Qur'an, the idea of praying for someone is a kind of endorsement. And استغفرت لهم أم لم تستغفر لهم لن يغفر الله لهم. Even in this story, asking the father to ask for their forgiveness is a kind of tacit endorsement that we're okay now. And it's kind of we're on, the past is gone, and it's symbolized by the fact that you prayed for us.
Well, in the Quran, wouldn't it be that the point at which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevents you from praying for someone that is important? So the idea, as I understand it, is that the asl is you can, but then You cannot after a certain point. من بعد ما تبين لهم أنهم أصحاب الجحيم. So after it has been made clear that these people are now not going to believe they're أصحاب الجحيم, that at that point you stop praying for them. And that's obviously something that's known through wahi. But
So let me ask you this: does the biblical account make a distinction? Biblical literature, does it make a distinction between praying for someone and blessing someone?
I think the word for praying for someone would just be blessing someone. So I don't think there is. Yeah.
Okay, that answers some of it. Yeah. Okay. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojournings are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained the days of the years of my fathers in their days of sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from Pharaoh's presence. What does he mean by all that?
Means that he's had a really difficult life, and it's been really short as well. So he didn't reach the kind of the great age that his fathers reached, Abraham and Isaac. So therefore, and you can sense that he's near the end of his life, so he's not going to reach that age. And he's sort of recognizing that he's had a difficult life, right? So he got taken in by, he got chased out of town by his brother Esau. He got taken in by Laban, who kind of conned him into marrying the wrong daughter. Then he had to work several more years for him to marry the right daughter. Then his favorite wife passes away. His daughter Dinah is gang raped by a neighboring tribe. His son is so it's been a really tough time for Jacob, as the Bible presents it. His character he's certainly a trickster in the biblical telling, but he gets his yeah. So that's certainly part of his character. So right at the start, he tricks Esau, his older brother, into he tricks him out of his birthright, right? So
of prophecy, you mean?
Yeah. So Isaac wants to give the blessing that he received from Abraham, right? This promise that he received of the covenantal promise to the elder son Esau. And just as he's getting ready to do that, he's in his old age. Isaac is dying. His eyesight is weak. He says, "Go out, bring me some game," because Esau's a hunter. So go hunt some deer for me. And then while he's gone, Jacob's mother tells him how, dress up like Esau, put some kind of goat hair on your arms because Esau's really hairy, impersonate his voice really well, tell your dad that you're Esau and get him to bless you. And so Isaac blesses the wrong child, right? So that kind of characteristic, you see that again and again with Jacob. He tricks his father. He tricks his father. Then he tricks Esau at least twice in the story. So the fact that near the end of the story he's being tricked by his children into thinking Jacob's dead. Thinking Joseph's dead. From narrative perspective in the Bible, he's getting his comeuppance. So I actually think that in terms of comparing the two stories, Jacob is much more different in the Quranic account than Joseph is.
That was hard to hear.
Right.
Alayhi salam.
Yeah. The Joseph character in the Quran,
man.
The Joseph character in the Quran, I think he's recognizably the Joseph character in the Bible. There are some significant differences, but it's essentially the same story with some important differences. But the Jacob story, the Jacob character is unrecognizable.
Even Yusuf, he had, according to what you told us, he had it coming. In
right.
The biblical version. My God.
Yeah, you see it. You see it very clearly. He's just tricking everyone, and then he kind of gets his up.
But didn't he get he got tricked before by Laban?
Yeah, but he continues tricking, because even after that, then he goes and he tricks Esau again.
Okay, maybe I'm jumping too far ahead, but is this the reason why the allegation was that Jibreel alayhi salam got the wrong address and it should have been one of us?
Should have been.
Like, it shouldn't have been Muhammad Rasulullah, it should have been one of us, the Israelites. Like, man kana aduwwa li Jibreel.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's tafsir, right? I don't know how historical that is.
Okay. So my thing is, like, for us, the institution of prophethood, Allahu yastafi min al-malaikati rusulan wa min al-nas. It's a sacred institution, divinely ordained. There are no mishaps by which somebody accidentally becomes a prophet or gets blessed. And then the other piece of this is clearly, even in the biblical account, Yaqub alayhi salam is a prophet. God is speaking to him directly, not to Esau, right? Is he a prophet too in the Bible or no?
No.
Okay, so and he becomes a prophet by by his own trickery, and God just goes along with that in His infinite wisdom. Like,
Receiving
how
a
do they
blessing.
reconcile this?
Yeah. It's like once he's gets the blessing from Isaac, it's a sealed deal. But
It sounds almost like Yadullahi Maghlula, the accusation about Allah. You know what I'm saying?
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. But what's interesting about the wrong address, just to come back to the
well, he's got the ticket. I mean,
yeah. What can you do?
Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. I mean, this is okay. I want to study the biblical account to appreciate what is in that tradition and what we can take from it. But man, does it make you love Quran more? The more like, especially when you talk to somebody of Christian and Jewish background and they've come to Islam, and especially when they compare the prophetic accounts, this is one of those places where تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ. Like you see their eyes roll with tears. Like, this is who he was. We were given a completely different prophet. It's just a passing thing in the stories of prophets from their tradition. But for us, it's like gut wrenching. It's like your family member being slandered.
I think it makes it is very helpful now. I mean, we already did the study of Surah Al-Baqarah, but it sheds new light, I think, on understanding some of the ayat which are responding to them. That Allahu yakhtassu bi rahmatihi man yasha. Just the emphasis that God is the one who exclusively chooses whomever He wills. Because maybe there was a need to correct an apprehension that had been absorbed through all these stories, in which, yes, people have sort of seized the right, and it can be seized back, hasadan, out of
أَنَّ لَهُ الْمُلْكُ عَلَيْنَا وَنَحْنُ أَحَقُّ بِالْمُلْكِ مِنْهُ. Same story, isn't it? Like the story of Talut. And questioning how he could be just chosen.
But maybe there's a sense in which they felt like, okay, it's possible to wrest it back from Muhammad Sallallahu or from the Ishmaelites, or there's some way to battle over these things rather than seeing it as a divinely done deal.
Well, what's interesting about that, so the Talmud recognizes that prophecy has ceased. They have the idea of Khatm al-Nubuwah, but they're very specific. They say prophecy has ceased from Israel. So there's nothing in Talmudic literature, as best I understand it, to say that there will no longer be any prophets ever again. But it's specifically they say Israel will not receive any
What's
prophets.
the last Israelite prophet according to them?
So it'd be Malachi, I believe. Malachi would be the final one.
Where is he historically?
Like
Jesus.
according to the Jews, right? He's like 200 BCE. I mean, he's no, he would have been pre-Hellenistic, right? So yeah, about 300, I guess, 300 BCE, 350 BCE, something like that. Wow. But for them, it's very clear the Nubuwah has come to an end. But they phrase it very interesting. They say prophecy has ceased from Israel, which is why the idea that they would have contested and said, no, Gabriel should have come to us. It doesn't make any sense from a Talmudic perspective. So I would just question the historicity of that account.
Well, it was there was a sense that they were waiting for a prophet. Or
for the Messiah. They were waiting for the Messiah. That's certainly
for
true.
the Messiah, exactly, and
right.
that should be from them. And then the Prophet Muhammad SAW has not come with a claim of being the Messiah,
right?
So it's also not what they were asking for. So yeah.
Okay, so then Yaqub alayhi salam leaves after talking about how he's had tough days. I mean, subtly, this is also a interesting contrast with Indama ashku bathi wa huzni ilallah. Maybe the Quran is commenting on this understanding of Jacob within that statement. I only take my grief and pain to Allah. And Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a holding in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as the Ramesses?
Ramses, I think.
Ramses, okay.
Ramses.
Yeah.
As Pharaoh had commanded. And
It's
Joseph
very difficult as people who used to live in Egypt, Saqib, to hear Ramses and not think of a very busy transport hub. There's a place in Cairo called Ramses, and you'd have to go there if you're connecting to other parts of the country. So honestly, I'm just picturing that's exactly where he was set up.
The bus stop.
It might be, I don't know. At the bus stop.
As Pharaoh had commanded, and Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread down to the mouths of the little ones. And there was no bread in all of the earth, for the famine was very grave, and the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph collected all the silver to be found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan in return for the provisions they were buying. And Joseph brought the silver to the house of Pharaoh. And
So
the silver of the land,
it indicates his honesty, right? So he's got all this power, but he still
passes it along honestly. Yeah. And the silver of the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan ran out, and all Egypt came to Joseph, saying, "Let us have bread, for why should we die before your eyes? For the silver is gone." And Joseph said, "Let me have your livestock, that I may give you in return for your livestock if the silver is gone." And they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them bread in return for the horses and the stock of sheep and the stock of cattle and donkeys, and he carried them forward with bread in return for all their livestock that year. And that year ran out, and they came to him the next year and said to him, "We shall not conceal from my lord that the silver has run out, and the animal stock are my lord's. Nothing is left for our lord but our carcasses and our farmland. Why should we die before your eyes? Both we and our farmland take possession of us and our farmland in return for bread. And we with our farmland will be slaves to Pharaoh. And give us seed that we may live and not die, and the farmland not turn to desert." And Joseph took possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, and for each Egyptian sold his field, as the famine was harsh upon them, and the land became Pharaoh's. And the people he moved town by town from one end of the border of Egypt to the other. Only the farmland of the priests he did not take in possession, for the priests had a fixed allotment from Pharaoh, and they ate from their allotment that Pharaoh had given them. So who's being enslaved at this point? Not the Israelites, the Egyptian people.
Egyptians, yeah. The money's run out. They mortgaged their livestock. They can't remortgage it. All they've got now is to give the land and themselves.
Right. Okay, and who are these priests?
So the priesthood, the Egyptian religion is, the pantheon is very well developed, right? It's very sophisticated kind of pantheon of gods. So places like Memphis, they would have had elaborate kind of temples and sub-temples and an elaborate priesthood to serve the gods of each temple. So and those priests are a big deal. So it's a big deal that Joseph marries into the priesthood, right?
Therefore they did not sell their farmland, and Joseph said to the people, "Look, I have taken possession of you this day with your farmland for Pharaoh. Here is seed for you, and sow the land. And when the harvest come, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be yours for seeding the fields and for your food, and for those in your household, and for your little ones to eat." And they said, "You have kept us alive. May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord in being Pharaoh's slaves." And Joseph
So just a quick point here. So they're saying, if you read it at a surface level, it seems like they're happy to be slaves, right? Maybe find favor in your eyes. So it's like, thank you, we will be slaves. So there's 2 ways you could read this. Either they're genuinely grateful for being slaves, and that's really weird for us to hear, but it's kind of like the difference between being self-employed and being having a kind of fixed income. Because if they're slaves now, they're going to be taken care of by Pharaoh. They're no longer responsible for themselves. It's now Pharaoh who's taken responsibility for them by owning them. And so the way slavery is looked at in the ancient world, there is a little bit of a shift of perspective that we need. So it is possible that they are genuinely grateful. The other way of reading this is that it's sarcastic. So they're saying, thanks a lot.
You kept us alive.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We're slaves now. That's wonderful. I think my own kind when I was studying this passage with my teacher at university, that's the perspective he took, that this is definitely sarcastic. And it's an irony because Joseph comes to Egypt as a slave, and by the end of it, he's ruling over them and has turned them all into slaves. And for that irony to work, they wouldn't be happy about it, right? They'd be like, what's kind of happened to us? And so what this is a kind of comment on is, Joseph is described at the beginning of this passage as wise, as hakam, and really it's this you have this tension that surfaces in a few places in the Bible between wisdom and prophecy, hikmah and nubuwah. And this is one of those stories where you see what the biblical priority is. So it's Joseph's hikmah which enables him to save the lives of these people, but it's a double-edged sword because he ends up enslaving them all. And then what do you need to get out of that situation? You need nubuwah. So then Moses will come along and rescue the people. So it's
hikmah and nubuwah are almost like the one leads to the need for the other.
Yeah,
one is not a blessing entirely on its own.
Right. So I mean, so the Bible is written across centuries with lots of different authors. People are going to have different perspectives, right? So there are books like Proverbs which speak very highly of hikmah, of chokhmah in Hebrew. But there is because chokhmah, wisdom, is something which is universally accessible. Anyone who tries to become wise can potentially become wise. Whereas it's not the case that anyone who tries to become a prophet can become a prophet. That's God choosing who He wills. So then there's this tension between wisdom, which is praised so highly in some place in the Bible, and prophecy, which is God's choosing and His revelation. What do you do if those two ever come into conflict? If wisdom is saying one thing and divine law is saying something else? And that's a variant of a problem that you see, right, in lots of cultures and lots of kind of religious systems. But the Bible kind of has that awareness. And through Joseph's story, you see one attempt that the Bible has of trying to resolve that, which is wisdom, intelligence, all these things are great, but they can land you into trouble, and they have to be subordinate, therefore, to prophecy. I'm not sure the Quran has that same solution.
Quran's at least alluding to the idea that the application of the solution for the famine and what transpires thereafter is basically inspired by revelation. So it's not his, like the entire strategy is not his own conjuring. And it may be that specifics of it, like this eventual the slavery obviously hasn't even been mentioned in the Quran. But whatever, if you just have the Quranic account, then what comes across is that the economic solution for Egypt was a divinely revealed one.
How would you get
by way of the interpretation of the dream. So the moment he hears the dream, he says, "This is what you're going to do." He didn't just say what it means. Okay. He literally said, "This is what you're going to do," in a very authoritative way, while still in the prison cell.
Yeah.
And then it would come down to also what is the source of the dream. What do you understand? What's your sort of cosmology, or the sense that the dream is from God, but has to be interpreted by someone also inspired by God.
Right.
If it's not from God, then how does it reflect reality? Or is it not coming from the upper spiritual realms, or however you're going to understand the nature of dreams? If it's literally just a person's dream, then it shouldn't have meaning, which then gives rise to specific policies.
It shouldn't have impact on the temporal world the way that it does.
Yeah. So in the biblical Joseph is also, when Pharaoh tells him his dream, he says the interpretation of dreams belongs to God, and then the interpretation. So he recognizes that this is a prophetic or dream that requires kind of prophetic solution. So it seems
that though initially the prophetic solution is applied, in the Quran it seems like 7 good years will be followed by 7 bad ones, and the 7 good ones will be good enough to survive the 7 bad ones. The biblical account seems to be that it wasn't good enough to survive the 7 bad ones, and things kept on getting worse.
Not without severe kind of ramifications, right?
Emergency measures had to be taken, and these drastic changes had to be brought in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but the Quran simply says you're going to be. I guess I'm skipping the ayah. It's not coming to my mind. Well, how does the Quran describe the 7 bad years? Yeah, here we go. So ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك سبع شداد يأكلن ما قدمتم لهن إلا قليلا ما تحصنون. And so the idea being that you're going to be able to save enough to survive. There's going to be 7 tough years that are going to eat up everything you put forward. إلا قليلا ما تحصنون. Save the little that you were able to keep up with. That قليلا ما تحصنون is not here in the biblical account. There's no little left. There's nothing left.
Yeah, that's interesting. Which ayah is that in Surah?
This is ayah number 48. And then there's the good year. Is there even a mention of a good year in the biblical? ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك عام فيه يغاث الناس وفيه يعصرون. How are they going to do? How are they going to be mughath, and how are they going to do i'sar if they're all slaves now and you ain't got no land to do, asr in?
So is the Quran implying that the brothers came in that final year? Is that
No, the brothers still came in a difficult year because they came with whatever little they had to give away now.
Okay.
Like, what's the word they use for their goods?
بضاعة
Muzjat, bida'atin muzjat, which basically means we picked up the mugs and spoons and whatever we could find at home and just, please take anything you can. Give us whatever. We don't have goods left to sell. So there's some parallel. We don't have much left to sell. But there isn't the extent that, the enslavement has occurred.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. There is a plan here in the Quran. يأكلن ما قدمتم لهن إلا قليلا مما تحسنون. Yeah, that's definitely a different plan. I hadn't noticed that.
I recall that the enslavement part, it comes up in the tafsir though. But again, sort of how consistent is it with the Quranic account? Because we've noted before sometimes the tafsir are mentioning things from the Bible, or via whatever route it gets into the tafsir, through Israeliyat and whatever, which don't always match what is actually mentioned in the Quran, which might actually go against certain things. This could be another example of that.
Yeah.
It could be another example. That's what I'm saying.
I've been hearing, this is my informal listening to durus about the Israelites and Surah Yusuf and all of it, right? So I don't know if this is just popular hearsay or is rooted in something academic, but the idea that the Israelites were actually in a high place, they were kind of given this makana by Yusuf alayhi salam, bringing them into Egypt. And then when the empire change happened a few generations later, then those that were in elite positions were now the opposite. They were the ones looked down upon. They were the ones that were the outsiders, and then they were enslaved. So the ones that were favored were the ones that were abhorred by then. So just growing up and listening to durus of these things, the picture that I had in my mind is different from what I'm getting from the biblical account, and that is they're already abhorred, and they should be in like the outskirts, or they should be in the farmland similar to Canaan, like stay within your lane kind of thing. But have you also come across Suhaib of they were like in a preferential place, they were given special treatment, and then when the empire shifted or changed, then new governance came in and they were the ones that were unfavorable to the Israelites and then enslaved them?
I'm not sure, because if there's not a specific ayah that it would be talked under, I'm not sure I would come across it. So I'm not sure.
But there
could be other sources, in our tradition as well, which talk more other parts of the history, such as Qasas al-Anbiya literature but I haven't seen it myself.
Yeah, that's right.
But in terms of their privilege, remember the Egyptians are now being given the status of serfs. They're slaves of Pharaoh. Where the Israelites, they might be looked down upon, but they do have freedom, and they do have a good land in which to dwell. So there is a sense in which they now have the upper hand, right? They're free in Egypt, whereas the residents are in really dire straits.
It's pretty wild because there's lots of questions that come in my head as I read this. For instance, if everybody else is running out of livestock and they can't grow anything on the land because of the famine, and they're offering their land, then why are the Israelites not in the same precarious situation? Why are they okay? Is their land irrigated unlike other lands?
Yeah. So I
go with
I don't know. I mean, Joseph's clearly looking out for them. So I don't know. But I mean, so one of the things that just earlier we read that Pharaoh is going to give his, he's going to make them kind of shepherds of his own private.
Yes, his own flock. Yes.
Flock. So that's a royal job, right? That they're basically being given palace jobs, and so
they come with an extra level of economic security.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So they're not they're still shepherds, but they're shepherds to the king. So that,
and therefore the water supply and the food supply for those animals must be especially taken care of because it's the royal flock. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So one. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one additional point is that what you're reading here in terms of how they end up selling themselves, how the Egyptians end up selling themselves to slavery, does in Leviticus get formalized into what you do in when there's debt, when someone's severely indebted. So the idea of selling yourself into slavery, which Joseph allows the Egyptians to do, becomes part of Israelite law, and so an Israelite, if he's in severe debt, can do that, sell himself into slavery. Which is a couple of things about it. Firstly, just as a point of interest, in Islamic law, you cannot do that. You can't sell yourself into slavery. And the second thing is the one place in the surah where slavery is alluded to is dirahima ma'duda. There's this indication there that even though they got what we know is a huge amount of money for it, the Qur'an talks about it as a few pennies, hinting that what you're getting for selling someone into slavery is just not worth the price. So it could be specifically Yusuf, right, or it could be a generic comment about selling someone into slavery.
And then there was the aspect of Binyamin being. I don't know if you'd have to interpret it as enslaved, but that he, فَهُوَ جَزَاؤُهُ, that if he is the one who's guilty of theft, then he is the penalty. So I guess that would mean enslaved.
Which could mean his life or could mean his freedom. Right?
Yeah.
Right, but I'm not sure I've sort of seen anyone suggesting that it means that he would be killed.
Yeah. The more obvious seems to be that he's himself brought into slavery or detained.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because in order to be a payment, he has to be alive. If you kill him, he's not. Yeah. There's no jaza.
What's this moving people from one end of the border to the other?
So that's a resettling. Where is that? Which verse was that?
20. Are these numbers in the beginning or the end of the verse?
Normally in the beginning.
Okay, 21.
21. And Joseph reduced people of servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. So yeah, I think there was some ambiguity here. Let me go to the Hebrew. What do you have in your translation?
I have, and the people he moved town by town from one end of the border of Egypt to the other.
See, there's the note here that says in the Samaritan Pentateuch and Septuagint, see also Vulgate, Masoretic text, says, and he moved the people into the cities. So there's a difference in the text. So some of them don't have this additional part of he moved the people into the cities.
In verse 21, looking at the Hebrew, okay. Yeah, so it depends how you translate this. So it could just be he made them slaves if it's he'bid with a daleth, or he'bir with a resh would be he made them transported them. Yeah, so it depends on how. I guess there must be a textual variant there. It's either he transported them or he made them all slaves. If it's transported, then it would be it wouldn't fit in with what else we're reading, which is that they're basically allowed to continue working on their lands. So that seems to be incorrect. The idea of the transport of them.
Only the farmland of the priests he did not take in possession, for the priests had a fixed allotment from Pharaoh, and they ate from their allotment that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their farmland. And Joseph said to the people, "Look, I have taken possession of you this day with your farmland for Pharaoh. Here is seed for you, and sow the land. And when the harvest come, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be yours for seeding the field of your food, for those in your household and for your little ones to eat." And they said, "You have kept us alive." We read this, okay? Only the farmland of the priests, it did not become Pharaoh's. Everybody else gives a fifth.
Right.
And Israel dwelled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they took holdings in it and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. And Jacob's days and the years of his life were 147 years. And Israel's time came to die. Israel's time to die drew near, and he called for his sons, for Joseph, and he said to them, "If, pray, I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand, pray under my thigh, and act toward me with steadfast kindness. Pray do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, carry me from Egypt and bury me in their burial place." And he said, "I will do as you have spoken." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Israel bowed at the head of the bed. That would be the end of the chapter.
Yeah. So that mode of making someone swear, putting their hand under the thigh, that's euphemistic for putting the hand on the genitals. And it's just a ancient Near East custom, it seems, for making someone put their hand on something which is, particularly important. It could be a sacred object or whatever, in this case, near the genitalia, before making them swear to something, to emphasize the solemnity of the oath. So earlier, Abraham does the same with his servant when he says, "Don't get a foreign wife for my son Isaac."
So here's the Quran question then. Is there a parallel from Am kuntum shuhada'a idh hadara Yaqub al-maut ma ta'buduna min ba'di, that passage? What will you worship? When death came, he gathered his kids and said, "What will you worship after I'm gone?" And there's a spiritual discourse. And here he is gathering them, but he's more concerned about where he will be buried.
Right.
I mean, here he's just speaking to Joseph, right? And then in the next chapter, you've got more discourse with the rest of the brothers, isn't it?
And next 2 chapters.
But still not very close to what the Quran is relating.
No.
That's, I think, the most fascinating find in this reading has been how the Quran is highlighting scenes, dialogue, and episodes that in some way parallel the biblical account, but are actually in many ways absent from the biblical account completely. It's like a retelling of the story. Many of it seems. Yeah.
And you see actually in the pre-Quranic era, a lot of these attempts already being made to retell the story, right? Either in the pseudepigraphal literature or even in the rabbinic and patristic literature. So there was already a sense of discomfort that the stories, these characters are being portrayed in inappropriate ways. And so either in the homiletic, in the homilies, or in what's called the retold Bible genre, these stories were told with a lot of these uncomfortable passages ironed out, and that was all great, and that was very popular. But ultimately, the Bible, it was part of, it was canonized, and it was sort of set, and you just couldn't get away from the story. So one of the things that the Quran does, or did for the believers, is you just don't have to worry about those stories anymore. This is the account you need to worry about. No longer need to have this kind of cognitive dissonance between this is what I want the story to be, but this is what my sacred scripture says it is.
Yeah, that's really well said. There's this relief in the Quran's account of the story. Right. So what do you think? What should our ambition for tomorrow be? Should it be just 48, or 48 seems like a page and a half?
Yeah, I think we can finish it.
48 to 50?
Yeah.
Knock it out? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So inshallah, we'll wrap up our Bible comparison tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Thank you guys both. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.